a dinner gone cold, and a clue buried in the mashed potatoes. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're tuning in from. I love seeing this mystery-loving community grow. Your words always make this journey special. There's a particular sound a spoon makes when it meets mashed potatoes that have been worked past dignity. It's a soft sigh, like a gentleman agreeing to something beneath him. I heard that sound at 20 minutes to 1 because that's when Fritz decided I needed to understand the difference between pomme puree and what the world does to innocent tubers in the name of comfort. "Archie," he said, holding a copper pot like a newborn. "Silk. Clouds. Not—" He searched for the word, wrinkling his nose. "Paste. I'll try not to confuse them when I testify before the Senate," I told him. "But if you're angling for a raise, you'll want to pick a day when the boss didn't just finish 2 quarts of orchids and 6 ounces of stubbornness." From the office behind me, the stubbornness rumbled. Wolfe has a way of existing even when you don't see him. He's a pressure system, and the brownstone's barometer is set to his mood. At that moment, the needle pointed to fair if fed. We were 10 minutes from lunch. Fritz's puree would pass muster. The orchids had been watered, lectured, and forgiven. I was sharpening a pencil because it gave me something to do besides anticipate butter. That's when the doorbell sounded as if it had a guilty conscience. It's a fact that strangers do not ring our bell lightly. The ones who do usually bring trouble with a ribbon on it. I opened the door to locate the ribbon and found a man whose suit had seen better owners, and a woman with a face that had practiced calm all morning and didn't like how it fit. The man held a covered porcelain bowl with the reverence of a priest and the terror of a man who knows the reliquary might explode. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked me, guessing correctly and poorly in the same breath. "Please, we need Mr. Wolfe. It's urgent." "Most things that arrive in porcelain are," I said. "Step in. Remove your anxieties with your coats." They moved into the hall where Fritz's nose detected competition and arrived to challenge it. His eyes hit the bowl, then the woman's face, then mine in a quick triangle that concluded with, "Lunch is in danger." "Fritz," I said. "Guests." The woman was in her early 30s with a posture that said boarding school and a mouth that said she'd learned nothing there about being told no. The man was thin and careful and perspiring just enough to make me consider the value of the bowl's contents. In the office, Wolfe called, "Archie." He can do a lot with 2 syllables. This time it meant, who are they, why are they here, and can they be stopped without impeding lunch? I ushered the pair in. Wolfe eyed them from behind his desk. Egyptian cat, Roman, emperor. Take your pick. And didn't rise, of course. He doesn't rise for anything under $1,000 or over £1,000. I gave him the short form. A man, a woman, and a bowl that is either Thanksgiving or an exhibit. The man cleared his throat. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm Benton Sykes. I manage events for the Essex Colonial Club. This is Mrs. Trina Kincaid. She chairs the charity committee. We need your help at once." Wolfe made it to the second of his 3 favorite words. "Why?" Trina Kincaid didn't sit until I nodded at the red leather chair. Even then she perched like it might scold her. "There was a luncheon today," she said, "at the club. A tasting for Saturday's benefit. Harvest Hearts. The city's tallest hats and largest checkbooks. We were finalizing the menu. The main course was to be a rustic homage, braised short rib with pomme puree. Not mashed potatoes, Fritz murmured at the door on guard. "Pomme puree," she agreed, turning a point for diplomacy. During the tasting, one of our patrons, Mr. Jasper Gall, took a spoonful, made a face, and— She stopped, arranged her calm, and put it on. "He died." I glanced at the bowl. Sykes tightened his grip, Wolfe's eyes half-lidded. That meant he was thinking about appetite and homicide at the same time, which is his idea of multitasking. A grotesquerie. "It was chaos," Sykes said. Ambulance? Police? They closed the kitchen. They took samples of everything. But Mr. Gall, he tasted the puree first. People saw. And then he collapsed. The police are examining the lot, but the Essex Colonial Club is not designed for being examined, I said. It's designed for being revered. Trina Kincaid's look told me that the truth had been neither helpful nor new. There's more, she said. The puree was made by Fritz Brenner. If you want to watch a kitchen ghost go white, tell him his food killed a man. Fritz didn't go white. He went stainless steel. He stepped in and placed a hand on the copper pot he had guarded to the office door. Impossible, he said without temperature. I prepared puree here, in my kitchen, as a courtesy sample. I sent a small tureen an hour before the tasting, but then Mr. Sykes telephoned in a panic. He said the club chef had spoiled the batch with cream of convenience. Fritz made the word sound like a slur. So I sent another, fresh by car service. It left here at 11:45. Sykes nodded, swallowing. It arrived at 12:10. And at 12:15, Trina said, Jasper Gall tasted it. Wolfe shifted his bulk just enough to communicate his attention had fully arrived. Mr. Gall? A venture capitalist, Sykes said. Self-made and hard about it. He'd underwritten half the renovation of the club's south room. He was important. Dead men often are, I said. You brought the suspect? I tilted my chin at the lidded bowl Sykes still clutched. He glanced down at it like it might bite. This is a portion the police didn't take. The club's counsel told me to shove it down a drain. Mrs. Kincaid told me to bring it to you. I overruled the counsel, Trina said evenly. He was thinking of liability. I'm thinking of fact. You're also thinking of Saturday's benefit, I said. And the headlines if it's cancelled because the potatoes are lethal. Her mouth twitched. I'm thinking of people who depend on that benefit, and of Mr. Brenner's reputation. He is known. She glanced to Fritz. If this was tampered with, it didn't happen in his kitchen. If, Wolfe said, dangerous like a quiet street after midnight. You expect me to save your gala, your club, and Mr. Brenner's repute. Trina met it. I expect you to tell the truth. If it helps us, good. If it doesn't, at least it will be the truth. Wolfe breathed out through his nose, which is his equivalent of a smirk. Noble. Expensive. He looked at Fritz. You sent 2 tureens. 1, Fritz said. A replacement, freshly milled. Butter warmed separately, folded in. Salt exact. Nothing. Extraneous. Who packaged it? I did. I sealed it. I gave it to the driver from Amber Car Service. A tall man, brown coat, clean nails. He carried it as if it mattered, which I appreciated. He signed. Wolfe closed his eyes. And yet Mr. Gall is dead. Mr. Goodwin. Yes, sir? Phone Saul Panzer. Tell him to find the driver from Amber Car Service who came here at 11:45 and delivered to the Essex Colonial Club at 12:10. Then call Mr. Kramer and inform him that a sample of the suspect substance is in my office and that I will not ingest it. Sykes's shoulders fell, either in relief or because the bowl was winning. You'll take the case? Wolfe opened his eyes. I will consider the question after lunch. He flicked a glance at the clock. Fritz, we will not eat mashed potatoes. Pomme puree, Fritz repeated, wounded but soldiering. With the braised leeks and the trout. The trout, Wolfe said, will suffice. Trina rose, as if to argue against trout. Mr. Wolfe, there is also... She stopped, measuring us. There was a card. In the kitchen. I didn't show the police because I didn't know what it meant. It was tucked under the spice rack. Only one word. Comfort. Handwritten, block letters. Fritz made a sound in his throat I hadn't heard before. Sykes winced. Wolfe's gaze moved to the far wall and stayed there a moment, like a man reading a book none of us could see. Comfort, he said at last. A curious word to leave in a kitchen. It's the name of a chain, Sykes muttered. Comfort foods. They make boxed, well, instant. He stopped because he was in a room where instant was an obscenity. Their founder, Lila Voss, was at the tasting. She and Mr. Gall had differences. Trina put a lid on that with a look. We'll answer questions after lunch if you'll have us back. I know your rules. Wolfe studied her. He does not admire many people. He didn't admire her now, but he acknowledged she existed in a way that would continue to be true. Return at 3, he said. Mr. Goodwin will take a statement. Mr. Panzer will have done something useful. Mr. Kramer will have done something obdurate. In the interim, I will think. He inclined his head at the bowl. Leave that. Archie, refrigerate it. Do not taste it. Do not feed it to Mr. Kramer. I'll resist, I said, though it's tempting. Sykes set the bowl on the side table like he was placing down a sleeping cobra and backed away. Trina extended a gloved hand to Wolfe. He didn't take it. She didn't seem surprised. They left with a breeze of club air and expensive intent. I carried the bowl to the kitchen, Fritz glaring at it like it had called his mother names. He cleared a shelf like a triage nurse and slid the porcelain in. The refrigerator door thumped shut with the finality of a cell. Back in the office, Wolfe had his head tilted, eyes closed, fingers steepled. I know the signs. The machinery was warming. I sat, picked up the phone, and dialed Panzer. When he answered, I gave him the essentials and the times. He made a noise that meant it would be done, and not to insult him by asking how. Then I phoned Inspector Kramer. He accepted the information like a man receiving a mint he suspects is a grenade and said he was on his way whether we liked it or not. He didn't ask us to save him a seat for trout. Archie, Wolfe said as I hung up. Note, Mr. Gall's history, Mrs. Kincaid's committee, Mr. Sykes's employment, Miss Lila Voss and her company, and any public friction among them. Begin with appetite. Contracts, sponsorships, donations. Follow with enmity, slights, exclusions, vetoes. Attend closely to substitutions. The word comfort is not merely sardonic. Substitutions, I said. As in, trade this for that. Butter for oil. Cream for instant. As in, Wolfe said, opening his eyes. Something that should not be there, placed where it will do the most harm to those who care about what is there. He shifted his gaze to the kitchen door where Fritz's shadow stood sentinel. Someone has taken a liberty with my house. Technically, I said, with your potatoes. My house, he repeated, and the barometer fell a notch toward storm. Lunch wasn't cancelled, and the trout died a hero. But it didn't taste like victory. When a man is murdered by comfort, nobody in this brownstone feels comfortable. Especially not me. Because at 3 o'clock I was going to start a list of suspects whose motives were going to sound an awful lot like appetite. And murder disguised in mashed potatoes. That's not just a crime, it's a personal insult, which, if you know Nero Wolfe, is exactly the sort of thing that makes him take a case, for reasons he won't immediately explain. Kramer made it in time to scare the trout bones. If I had let him through the kitchen, he'd have arrested the refrigerator for conspiracy. He came bulling into the office with Pearlie Stebbins in tow, planted his fists on the edge of Wolfe's desk, and sniffed. If suspicion had a smell, Kramer manufactures it on sight. So, he said, you've got evidence from a scene sealed by the NYPD sitting in your icebox. Wolfe didn't uncross a finger. We have food, Inspector. If you desire to take it and shorten its life, you're welcome. Mr. Goodwin has conscientiously notified you. Pearlie's small eyes shifted to me, like he wanted to tuck me into his pocket and sit on me. What's in it? Mashed potatoes, I said. Pommes puree, Fritz called from the doorway, then realized he'd entered an arena where nuance couldn't survive and retreated. Kramer grunted. I've already got CSU tearing apart the kitchen at the Essex Colonial. I've got 6 witnesses who saw Jasper Gall taste your cook's fancy paste and fall down like a sack of nails. I've got newshawks camped on the club steps like pigeons on a statue. And you... He chewed on his cigar without lighting it, which is how you know he's trying to be polite. You're playing pantry. I'm sedentary, Wolfe said. Not playful. You may take the bowl. He didn't say please. Kramer jerked a thumb at Pearlie, who went to the kitchen accompanied by my chaperone instincts and retrieved the porcelain prisoner, sealed by Fritz with more tape than a moving company. Pearlie logged it, bagged it, and I countersigned because I enjoy watching government paper reproduce. Don't meddle, Kramer told me, which in our dialect is a benediction. I'm counting Voss and the club chef at the top of the list. Maybe your lady philanthropist, the Kincaid dame. Gall wasn't popular. There's going to be a stampede to not be sorry he's dead. You'll want the car service manifest between 11:30 and 12:15, I said. Amber car, a tall driver with clean nails. Fritz noticed, and you'll want to know why there was a card in the club kitchen with comfort on it. He stopped chewing. A card? Who says? I do, I said. Our client volunteered it. She's back at 3. You can fight me for the front chair. He squinted. Client, Wolfe intervened before I started a fight he'd have to finish with vocabulary. Mrs. Kincaid and Mr. Sykes have engaged us to ascertain whether Mr. Gall's death is attributable to a deliberate act conducted through the puree supplied by Mr. Brenner, and if so, by whom and why. That's a lot of words to say meddle, Kramer said. He tapped the bag. If this test's hot for anything but starch, I'll be back with bracelets, and keep Panzer's paws out of my drivers. When Mr. Panzer uses his paws, Inspector, Wolfe said mildly, you don't know until your cuffs are on the right person. Kramer snorted, headed for the door, and threw one last log on my fire. If you're trying to keep your chef out of it, tell him to stop loaning out lunch to rich people who think philanthropy is a soup course. When they'd gone, the office expanded by 3 feet and let out its breath. Wolfe's eyes closed. He was saving words, which meant he expected to need them soon. At 2:30, I had Saul on the wire. He had news trimmed clean and tied with a bow. Driver's name is Lloyd Newsom, Saul said. Amber car, hired for a rush to the Essex Colonial by a call from a prepaid cell. Number's dead now. Newsom picked up a sealed white porcelain tureen from a brownstone in the 30s, ours, and drove straight to the club. No stoplights long enough to open a napkin ring. He put it in the hands of Benton Sykes himself at 12:10. No detour, no detente, no detonation. And the prepaid. Purchased yesterday afternoon at a bodega on 10th. Clark remembers a woman, short, blonde, wore oversized sunglasses that made her look like a housefly. She bought the phone, a magazine, and a packet of instant spuds. Brand, Comfort Foods. Because the universe thinks it's funny. Find her? I'm on it. Also, Gall had a scheduled meeting at 1:30 today with a man named Wyatt Drum, legal counsel to Comfort Foods. Cancelled for obvious reasons. Drum is still in the city. Drum first, I said. Then the woman if you can pull a thread. Watch your fingers. Kramer's weaving a sweater. At 3 sharp, the bell rang again. Trina Kincaid and Benton Sykes came in looking like the lobby of a respectable bank after a robber sneezes, composed and dusty. I had the red chair primed for Trina. Sykes took the one that always makes men sit upright. Before I could open my notebook, Wolfe addressed Mrs. Kincaid without preamble. Describe your relationship with Mr. Gall. Her chin didn't move. He donated to my committee's causes and expected me to remember his name first in rooms that mattered. He believed generosity entitled him to reverence and tax advantages. He was not a good man. He was an adequate donor. Did he threaten your event? Only with his presence, she said dryly. But he was quarreling with Lila Voss. They were arguing about the optics of serving French-style puree at a benefit underwritten by Comfort Foods, whose business model is convenience. Ms. Voss wanted her company's instant mashed potato product to be featured in a homey course. I declined. She took it poorly. Sykes shifted. Jasper liked needling her. He called the instant product culinary sawdust in front of half the tasting. Miss Voss told him he didn't know comfort unless someone else paid for it. "And the club chef," I said. "Name, disposition." "Henri Lebras," Sykes said, wincing like the name had thorns. "He's an artist with sauce and a saboteur with a budget. He and Fritz know each other by reputation. Henri doesn't like outside dishes in his kitchen. He claimed Fritz's puree was precious, which in Henri's dialect means better than mine. I told him to behave himself or I'd send him home to Peel." "Enemies?" I asked Trina. "Oh, a flock," she said. "But if you mean people with access to the kitchen and motive to embarrass us, try Miss Voss, Henry, and Mr. Gall's business partner, a woman named Cora Bell. Cora and Jasper borrowed each other's knives. She hides steel behind pearls." "Add a fourth," I said. "Whoever slipped a card under the spice rack with comfort, printed by hand." Trina's gloves tightened in her lap. "Yes, that. I found it during the panic. I put it in my clutch because I didn't want the police to treat it like a prank and discard it. It's here." She opened a black leather envelope and drew out an index card, white with the single word block printed, firm and neat, in a blue ink that had thought about being black. I took it with tongs from my desk set and placed it on Wolfe's blotter. He leaned forward half an inch, which for him is a lunge. He didn't touch it. He just let his eyes weigh it. "Mr. Sykes," he said finally, "where is your chef?" "Henri, at the club, raging at the police because they moved his knives." "Call him," Wolfe said. "Tell him Mr. Goodwin will come. He will not consent to being delayed or trifled with. Mrs. Kincaid, you will summon Miss Voss and Miss Bell to attend here at 5. If either declines, inform them I will so interpret their refusal that Inspector Kramer will enjoy it." Trina smiled with no teeth. "They'll come." "Good," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin." That was my cue to go out and mingle with the upper crust's underside. I took my hat and told Fritz where I kept my last will. On the sidewalk, the air had that refreshed look New York gets after the papers have been gathered, but before the next edition hits. I cabbed to the Essex Colonial, an edifice designed to remind out-of-towners that the past is expensive. The police tape fluttered at the service entrance like a half-hearted flag. Pearlie Stebbins was keeping it company. "You," he said, which is his word for hello. "Keep walking." I produced the card from Wolfe's oversize engraved stationery, the one that opens doors because it suggests closed wallets. "Wolfe wants me inside to keep your chef from swallowing his tongue." Pearlie studied it like it might confess. Then he lifted the tape high enough to muss my hair. 5 minutes, he said. "And don't pocket anything that isn't moving." The club kitchen had been paused mid-temper tantrum. Stainless surfaces, uprooted. Spice, jars herded like suspects. A workstation reserved for potatoes looked like the site of a minor mining accident. Henri Lebras was built like a prayer candle and wore his toque like a grudge. He whirled when I entered. "Non," he said, before I'd offered him a choice. "I will not be smeared by a puree of lies. Your Wolfe thinks he can float above us and name guilt like he names herbs." "Mr. Lebras," I said, "if Wolfe named herbs the way you name alibis, we'd all be dead of tarragon." He flapped both hands, which is how chefs exhale. "I did not poison Mr. Gall. I did not touch Mr. Brenner's pot. I despise instant potatoes. They are an insult, even to Americans." "Who touched the pot?" I asked. "From the moment Sykes took it from the driver till it met Gall. Benton put it on the end station there. I shouted at him for contaminating my mise. He ignored me. I went to the cold room for butter. When I returned, the lid was crooked by a 1/4 inch, like someone with clumsy fingers had peeked. I straightened it. Then Miss Kincaid swept through issuing decrees like Marie Antoinette with better shoes. Then the guests arrived and His mouth tightened. I tasted a smear. It was fine, good even. Brenner is Brenner. For potatoes, one Bose. Who could have peeked? I said. Everyone, Henry spat. The pastry sous, who resents savory. The porter, who thinks sauces are conspiracies. Lila Voss, who totters in here like a queen of boxes. Cora Bell, who looks at food the way you look at money. Benton, who is always counting something. The club president, Mr. Yale, he likes to pretend he used to be a chef because he owns knives with his initials. Any of them leave the room. Voss, twice to field calls. Bell, once to powder her motives. Benton, constantly to keep his heart rate up. The porter, 15 times because that is his job. The pastry sous never leaves. He thinks the hallway judges him. I circled the station, the spice rack crouched near the potatoes' last stand, a gap where a small jar might habitually reside. I pointed. What usually sits there? White pepper, he said. It is missing because your police took it and also because they have no palate. Before the panic, I said, at 11:50. He frowned, rolled time back in his eyes. There, he said, and his finger hovered over the empty square. Yes, it was there. A CSU tech coughed on purpose to remind both of us that we were guests. Pearlie cleared his throat from the doorway. Time, he said. I nodded to Henri. At 5, my office. Bring your temper and anything you call truth. He flung a hand. I have service at 6. Not today, you don't, Pearlie said, and enjoyed it. Back in the cab, I called Saul. He'd found the lawyer, Wyatt Drum, in a bar with fewer mirrors than conscience. Drum had provided a summary. Comfort Foods had pledged a significant sponsorship for the benefit in return for being named presenting partner and having their product highlighted in a dish. Kincaid had balked. She wanted elegance, not marketing. Gall had privately told Voss he would support her if she supported a side deal at the club, a frozen dessert contract replacing a local vendor with a Comfort Foods division. Voss had smiled. Then Gall had insulted her instant line in public. Drum, loyal to a retainer, wept into his rye at the injustice of it all. Find me Voss's travel schedule, I said. If she planned to be anywhere at 5, I want to know who told her she can't. I reached the brownstone at 4:30. Wolfe was where I left him, doing something to the air with his eyes. I gave him Henri's account, the lid angle, the white pepper gap, and Saul's harvest. He closed his eyes and let the pieces land on whatever private board he plays. Substitutions, he murmured, and affronts. Mr. Gall's death served 2 appetites, humiliation and convenience. The card, comfort, is either a sneer at Mr. Brenner, a brand, or a signature. We will discover which. You think the lid was lifted? I said. I think, he said, that what makes a puree lethal is not what is added, but when and by whom. Mrs. Kincaid, Ms. Voss, Ms. Bell, Mr. Sykes, Mr. Lebras, their hands were near the bowl. Mr. Gall made enemies as if they were garnish. At 5, Archie, attend to their faces when I mention substitutions, especially Ms. Voss. She traffics in convenience. She will not like being asked whether she finds it convenient to kill. If she did it, I said, she won't say so. She will not need to, Wolfe said. She will betray it by defending the integrity of instant mashed potatoes. Only a zealot would. At 5, our bell was going to ring again, and when it did, Wolfe was going to conduct his first movement, seated, serene, and as merciful as a carving knife. At 5 sharp, the brownstone became the eye of a very polite storm. Trina Kincaid arrived first, poised but showing the kind of composure that costs energy. Behind her came Benton Sykes, sweating as if punctuality were a crime. Henri Lebras followed, stripped of his chef's whites and wearing a black suit that made him look like a pallbearer for his own reputation. Then came Cora Bell, tall, precise, with an economy of movement that could bankrupt anyone slower. And finally Lila Voss, wearing sunglasses indoors and a smile that was 60% marketing and 40% defiance. Wolfe sat behind his desk like the judge he would never bother to become, his expression unreadable and his yellow silk handkerchief tucked with geometrical perfection. I had the wall by the Globe bar, notebook ready. Saul had delivered a file an hour earlier. Backgrounds, fragments of gossip, bank whispers. Wolfe hadn't looked at it yet. He didn't need to. Fritz entered briefly to offer coffee, and Wolfe dismissed the gesture with a flick of his finger. Was not a time for civility. It was a time for precision. "Mrs. Kincaid," Wolfe began, "you and your companions will consider yourselves guests only in the most technical sense. Mr. Gall's death, inconvenient and odious, has attached itself to my household through the agency of Mr. Brenner. I propose to detach it, preferably without involving the police in your social lives more than they already are." Lila Voss adjusted her glasses, clearly bracing for condescension. "You're implying this is a private matter, Mr. Wolfe?" "I imply nothing, madam. I state murder, like indigestion, begins privately." That shut her up long enough for Wolfe to direct his attention to Henri Lebras. "Mr. Lebras, you claim that the tureen delivered by Mr. Brenner remained unopened from its departure to your kitchen until you found its lid displaced. Who, in that interval, could have altered its contents?" Henri's accent thickened with insult. "Anyone. The driver, the doorman, the porter. Even Benton," he gestured sharply towards Sykes. "He was fussing like a bride over soup. You ask me to guard something that is not mine, in a kitchen that becomes a parade. I turned my back for 60 seconds. 50, Sykes corrected. "And you shouted at the staff like a mad priest. Nobody touched that pot but you and me." "That's untrue," Henri snapped. "Miss Voss leaned over it with her phone. She said she was taking a picture for publicity." All eyes turned to her. Lila's smile barely twitched. "That's correct. I took one photo. The dish was sealed. You could bounce a coin off that lid." Wolfe's gaze didn't move, but the air thickened. "Madam, when you took this photo, what time?" 12 minutes before the tasting began," she said crisply. "I know because my PR assistant time-stamped it for our posts. 11:58. "Thank you." Wolfe turned his eyes to Sykes. "And the tasting commenced?" "Precisely at 12:15, Sykes said, wiping his forehead. "Mr. Gall tasted the puree at 12:17. I noted the timing, which gives us roughly 20 minutes of opportunity between her photo and his fatal forkful," I said. Wolfe nodded, approving the math but not the commentary. "Indeed. A small window, sufficient for a small act. Mr. Lebras, when you straightened the lid, was there residue or moisture along the rim?" Henry blinked, replaying memory like a reluctant film. "There was condensation, yes, from the heat. Nothing more." "Condensation from a pot sealed until that moment. Curious," Wolfe murmured. "A truly sealed vessel retains its own moisture." Lila interjected, her tone sharpening. "Are you accusing me of doctoring mashed potatoes, Mr. Wolfe? I sell convenience, not poison." "Convenience," Wolfe said softly, "is often indistinguishable from betrayal. You will forgive me if I distrust both." Cora Bell, who had been silent long enough to seem superior, finally spoke. "If we're all under suspicion, let's not pretend it's only about the food. Jasper Gall had enemies in and out of business. Lila and he were at each other's throats over that sponsorship, but Jasper was going to drop her company from a bigger deal, a nationwide contract for ready-made sides in luxury markets. I know because I drafted the letter." Trina's eyes flickered. "You didn't mention that to the police." "I didn't mention it to anyone," Cora said. "I burned the draft after he died. It was business, cold, but not fatal." "Everything fatal begins as business," I said, mostly for Wolfe's benefit. He ignored me and leaned forward a half-inch. "Mrs. Kincaid, you said earlier you found a card with the word comfort beneath the spice rack. Did you show it to anyone present here before bringing it to me? No, she said. I pocketed it before the police arrived. I was afraid it would vanish in the confusion. Lila Voss's lips tightened. You mean you tampered with the scene? I mean, Trina said, her voice level, I preserved evidence you would have shredded if it bore your logo. A ripple of tension passed through the room like static. Wolfe watched them all as if they were playing chess without realizing it. Ladies, he said finally, please. There is no need for dissembling when the truth is already speaking for you. The tampering did not occur at the club. It occurred before the tureen reached the kitchen. Sykes gaped. Before? That's impossible. The driver, Saul traced him, went straight from here to the club. Indeed he did, Wolfe said. But the order originated from a disposable phone purchased by a woman who also bought instant mashed potatoes, a fact established by Mr. Panzer. A substitution, Mr. Sykes, occurred before Mr. Brenner's puree ever left his kitchen. Fritz, standing in the doorway unseen until that moment, let out a strangled sound. No one touched that tureen but me. Wolfe inclined his head. And yet you sent it to the club at 11:45. Who informed you the first batch was spoiled? Sykes froze. Well, yes, I called him. Henry said the first was ruined. That's why Fritz made a new one. Who told you the first was spoiled? Wolfe asked again. Henry's hands rose in outrage. Not I. I said it was delayed, not spoiled. All eyes turned to Lila Voss. Her expression didn't change, but her hand twitched once on her knee. Wolfe noticed. He always does. I did, she said finally, cool as glass. I called. I told Mr. Sykes that the kitchen sample was compromised. I wanted to make sure the club received a perfect batch. I was trying to help. Help, Wolfe repeated, tasting the word like vinegar. You phoned Mr. Brenner's household under the pretense of professionalism, using a disposable number purchased that morning. You ensured a second. Tureen would be dispatched. One more opportunity for interference, and you happened to sell the only brand of instant potato found on Mr. Gall's spoon. Her mask cracked for half a second, just enough for me to see the tremor of rage. That's speculation. It's deduction, Wolfe said. Mr. Gall humiliated you. You sought revenge that would appear poetic and plausible. A death by your own product, delivered in a dish he mocked. The substitution was simple. Replace a portion of the true puree with your powdered counterfeit, pre-treated with whatever toxin you or your chemists had access to. When the tureen was sealed again, even Mr. Brenner's precision could not protect it. Silence followed, thick and brittle. Trina stared at Lila as if seeing her for the first time. Henry crossed himself, muttering in French. Then Lila laughed, a bright, brittle sound. You have no proof. None. You can't tie a brand name to a molecule. Not yet, Wolfe said. But Kramer will. The police now have the tureen, and chemical analysis will confirm that your powdered potato, comforting as it pretends to be, contains more than dehydrated starch. I've already informed him of your potential contribution to gastronomy. Her composure fractured. You set me up? No, Wolfe said, cutting her cleanly. You seasoned your own trap. I merely tasted the aroma. Lila rose, but Trina was faster. Sit down, she said coldly. You'll leave when the inspector arrives. Lila hesitated, then sank back into her chair with the stiffness of someone aware she was already cooked. Wolfe finally leaned back, closing his eyes. Mr. Goodwin, see that Inspector Kramer is informed that his culprit awaits him. Tell him he may collect her before dinner, but not during. I nodded and moved to the phone. Behind me, the silence of the brownstone reclaimed its dominance. Fritz exhaled like a man absolved, Henry muttered a prayer, and Cora Bell merely smirked as if the world had arranged itself to her advantage again. Wolfe opened his eyes a fraction. There is no more insult to food, he said, than to make it both bad and deadly. Humanity can be forgiven for many sins, Archie, but not for turning comfort into poison. Which, I said, glancing at Lila, is exactly what she did. He nodded once. Yes, and fittingly, in mashed potatoes. When Kramer's heavy tread shook the hall 20 minutes later, Wolfe didn't stir. He had already withdrawn into thought, leaving me to handle the noise. And as I opened the door to let the law in, I realized something that would have amused him. No matter how big the world gets, every mystery at its core still boils down to appetite, served hot or cold. Kramer came in like a storm that already knew the forecast. His coat was half-buttoned, his eyes red from what I guessed were too many cigarettes and not enough faith in human nature. Pearlie trailed behind him, lugging a satchel big enough to hold a confession or a small corpse. Lila Voss didn't flinch when they entered. She sat perfectly still, her chin up, every line in her face pulled tight to keep the world from seeing the crack beneath. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. He never does for weather. I got your call, Kramer said, tossing his hat onto my desk with the accuracy of a man who'd done it too many times. If you're wasting my time again, Wolfe— Inspector, Wolfe interrupted smoothly. The lady to your left is not a victim of slander, as she will soon claim, but of her own enterprise. She killed Jasper Gall. I trust you brought your cuffs polished. Kramer's jaw flexed. He looked at Lila, then back at Wolfe. We've run tests. Preliminary came back 30 minutes ago, strychnine. Found traces in the puree, but no sign of how it got there. You telling me this woman slipped it in herself? I am not telling you, Inspector. I am presenting you with an inevitable conclusion. Wolfe's voice didn't rise, but it filled the room. Mrs. Voss engineered a substitution, an act of culinary sabotage disguised as marketing zeal. The tureen Mr. Brenner prepared was replaced or adulterated with her own product, a powdered mix branded Comfort. She introduced the poison during the substitution, ensured it would be served to her adversary, and relied on outrage or chaos and her reputation for propriety to deflect suspicion. Lila's laugh was sharp, brittle, the sound of porcelain cracking. You have no evidence, just your overfed imagination. If I'd wanted to harm Jasper Gall, I'd have done it with lawyers, not lunch. Kramer turned to me. Goodwin. Saul traced the prepaid phone used to call Fritz, I said. Bought yesterday morning by a woman fitting her description. Short, blonde, oversized sunglasses, and a knack for instant potatoes. The clerk remembered her. She's not subtle. Coincidence, Lila said tightly. I do product visits. I buy samples constantly. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. And yet the timing of your purchase and call aligned within 10 minutes of each other. A coincidence that reeks of design. He gestured lazily toward the card on his desk. And you left your calling card, madam. Literally. The word Comfort, handwritten, placed beneath a spice rack in a kitchen you alone had motive to enter. A petty signature masquerading as irony. Kramer moved closer to her. You planted that card? She didn't answer, but her eyes, those careful, market-tested eyes, flickered once, betraying more than words could. Cora Bell, who had watched the exchange with the serenity of a woman who keeps score, leaned back. Well, Lila, I suppose that's one way to get your brand exposure. Shut up, Cora, Lila hissed, her mask finally slipping. You're no saint. You were happy to let Jasper destroy anyone in his way. You think your hands are clean? Cleaner than yours, Cora replied, her smile small and sharp. Kramer snapped. Enough. I'll take care of the sermons later. Wolfe, you're sure of this? You're saying she poisoned her own product to get back at Gall? Not quite, Wolfe said, eyes closing briefly as if the matter were now beneath him. She used the product as an instrument of humiliation. She did not expect it to kill him, merely to make him ill, perhaps embarrassed, weakened. She wanted to prove, before witnesses, that even her so-called convenience food could outdo the finest puree of a master chef. But strychnine, even in minuscule measure, is unforgiving. What she intended as symbolic vengeance became irrevocable. That landed like a verdict. Lila's face drained of its cosmetic calm. "You think I'd risk that kind of spectacle?" she said hoarsely. "You think I'd gamble everything on one spoonful?" "You already had," Wolfe said. "Your brand was faltering, your investors restless. Gall's withdrawal of support would have cost you your position by year's end. You had to act, and you did. Your pride exceeded your intelligence." Kramer grunted, pulling a form from his pocket. "That's all I need. Pearlie." Pearlie stepped forward, producing the cuffs with the reverence of a man about to improve his day. But Lila stood before he could touch her. "You have nothing solid," she said, her voice low and cold. "Not one witness, not one fingerprint, not one—" A knock interrupted her. Fritz appeared in the doorway, pale but steady. He carried a small folded note. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "this was just delivered by courier." "No sender." Wolfe extended a hand. I took it from Fritz and unfolded it. Inside was a single line typed in neat black. "She's not the only one who wanted him dead. Don't serve justice too soon." Kramer swore. "What the hell?" "Archie," Wolfe said quietly. "Read it again." I did. He didn't move. "Inspector, before you proceed," Wolfe said, "we must consider the possibility that Mrs. Voss is both culprit and pawn. This note suggests orchestration, someone with foreknowledge of my involvement and the confidence to taunt." Kramer scowled. "You saying there's another player?" "Undoubtedly," Wolfe replied. "A manipulator who used Mrs. Voss's vanity as the delivery system for murder. The strychnine may not have been added to her powder at all, but to the tureen before the substitution, by someone who knew she would become the perfect suspect. Who, in this room, gains if her downfall coincides with Mr. Gall's?" The silence that followed could have buttered toast. My eyes moved to Cora Bell. Hers didn't flinch, but her breathing changed. Small, deliberate control. Trina Kincaid's lips parted, but she stayed quiet. Henri Lebras, pale and glistening, muttered a curse in French under his breath. Wolfe's gaze turned to Cora. "Miss Bell, would you care to enlighten us?" She smiled faintly. "Why would I? Jasper's dead, Lila's destroyed, and your detective tricks won't bring back either one's reputation. But if you're asking whether I might have known more than I said, perhaps." "Perhaps," Wolfe echoed. "An interesting adverb. Suggestive. Non-committal." Kramer growled. "Wolfe, I don't like this. If you've got something, spill it." "I have," Wolfe said. "But the flavor isn't complete. Mrs. Voss, your powdered mix. How's it packaged?" "Individually sealed pouches," she said faintly. "Hermetically sealed. No one can tamper without tearing the foil." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Then how did the poison enter it?" "Not by you, unless you prepared a custom batch outside your factory." "But who else had access?" "Gall's business partner," I said, catching on. "Cora Bell." Cora's eyes flicked toward me, sharp as a knife flash. Wolfe continued softly, "She drafts the contracts, arranges shipments, and oversees sample deliveries for sponsorship. She knew of the dispute between Gall and Voss, and foresaw that Lila's intervention would provide both motive and opportunity. A small addition, a substitution in the substitution, and Mrs. Voss becomes the instrument, the perfect camouflage." Kramer stepped closer to Cora. "That true?" Cora didn't blink. "Prove it." "Gladly," Wolfe said. "The note, Inspector, was delivered after Mrs. Voss's arrest was inevitable. Only one person here could anticipate that. One who heard me outline her guilt less than an hour ago. Someone confident enough to gloat." I crossed to the doorway, opened it. The corridor was empty except for the smell of rain and city air. "Courier didn't wait," I said. "Of course not," Wolfe murmured. "The messenger was arranged before this gathering began. Mrs. Bell, you are precise. You plan ahead. You expected me to stop at the first conviction." Cora smiled again. tight, brilliant, hopeless. Maybe I did. Maybe I thought you'd admire it. Admire, Wolfe said almost gently. I admire intellect, not malice. You killed a man, framed a fool, and almost sullied my kitchen. Mr. Goodwin, call the inspector's men outside. They may remove Mrs. Bell along with Mrs. Voss. Kramer exhaled like a furnace. 2 for 1. You're a magician, Wolfe. I am, Wolfe said, closing his eyes. A gourmand of truth, and today the dish was over-seasoned. As the officers led the 2 women out, one furious, one faintly amused, the air in the office lightened. Wolfe gestured toward the decanter. Archie, brandy, this conversation has fatigued me. Same here, I said, pouring. But you've got to admit, it was a clever twist. Poison in the instant mix, switched by a partner who hated them both. You sure you don't miss the excitement of field work? Excitement, Wolfe said, swirling his glass, is a condiment, best served rarely. What I prefer is closure. He raised the brandy, tasted, and sighed. At least now, he said, I may return to comfort without irony. And with that, the brownstone fell silent again, like a room that had eaten well after a long fast, while outside the rain began to fall, cleansing, steady, and faintly amused, as though even the city approved of the meal being over. The rain lasted into evening, tapping softly against the office windows like a polite reminder that the world outside didn't pause for the moral victories of men inside. Kramer had taken his prizes. Voss, furious and sputtering, and Cora Bell, cool as an unlit match, and left the brownstone smelling faintly of wet wool and satisfaction. Fritz served coffee without asking. He knew Wolfe's moods as well as he knew his sources, and he also knew that beneath the still surface of Wolfe's silence there was movement. Thought, not digestion. I leaned back in my chair and gave the scene a minute to breathe. The orchids upstairs had it easy, I thought. They only needed light and humidity. Wolfe required justice, logic, and enough calories to shame a bear. He hadn't moved since Kramer's exit. His eyes were half shut, but I knew better than to believe he was finished. Finally, he said, Archie, satisfaction is a dangerous illusion. Funny, I said. I was about to pour myself a second cup in celebration. You're telling me the case isn't closed? He exhaled slowly. The conclusion satisfies procedure. It does not satisfy me. That's a new slogan for you. You're saying 2 murderers in one afternoon wasn't enough exercise. His eyes opened. You persist in equating quantity with complexity. Mrs. Bell's confession, implicit though it was, relieved the inspector's impatience, but not my unease. Something was wrong in the cadence. The orchestration was too smooth. I put the cup down. Meaning what? He frowned slightly. Meaning that Mrs. Bell was intelligent enough to plan a deception, but not foolish enough to announce it with a note. Such melodrama is inconsistent with her temperament. She was subtle, precise. She preferred her victories invisible. I tilted my head. Then who sent the note? That, Mr. Goodwin, is precisely the question that continues to offend my digestion. The phone rang before I could reply. I reached for it. Nero Wolfe's office. Goodwin speaking. Goodwin, it's Saul. His voice carried a fatigue that meant he'd been digging where dirt was deep. I think you'll want to hear this. They're talking over at the precinct. Cora Bell lawyered up, naturally, but something's off. Voss isn't fighting the charge anymore. She's quiet. Doc at the station says she's been sick since they booked her, like really sick. Sick how? Convulsions, nausea, looks like strychnine exposure, low dose. The lab boys think she might have ingested trace amounts earlier, maybe from the same batch that killed Gall. But that doesn't fit, Archie. She never tasted the puree. Unless someone slipped it to her another way, I said. Exactly, Saul said. And get this. She got a call at noon yesterday. before the tasting, from a number that traced back to a landline at the Essex Colonial Club. The caller ID said, "Private Kitchen Line." Guess who was logged in at that station? I didn't need to guess. Henri Lebras. Bingo, Saul said. And that's not all. The manager swears Henri left the kitchen at 11:55, right before the tasting began, saying he needed to check on deliveries. He was gone 7 minutes. Enough to make a substitution, I said, my pulse kicking up. Enough to do a lot worse, Saul replied. You think Wolfe's still awake? Barely, I said, but his brain's running a marathon. I'll call you back. When I hung up, Wolfe's eyes were open fully. I heard, he said. Mr. Panzer's voice carries its own evidence. Proceed. I summarized, and when I finished, Wolfe's expression had darkened into that rare combination of disdain and interest. Lebras, he murmured, a man who reveres his own ego above all else. Yes. He despised Brenner, envied him, mocked him to anyone who would listen. He tolerated Mrs. Kincaid's oversight because her name shielded his, but Gall's death gave him something he could never achieve alone. Infamy disguised as culinary tragedy. You think he planned the whole thing? I asked. No, he was opportunistic, not prophetic. I suspect he saw the quarrel between Gall and Voss as fertile soil. He merely planted his own seed of malice. When Gall died, he let the weeds grow. And the note? Wolfe smiled thinly. A coward's insurance. If his scheme unraveled, it would appear that someone else, a vengeful partner, had manipulated events. It's too theatrical for Bell, but quite fitting for a chef who believes presentation forgives poison. I stood. So what's the next move? Fetch him, Wolfe said, politely. Inform him that Fritz's reputation demands a private tasting of truth. I gave him a look. You think Henry's going to stroll in here for dessert? He will if Mrs. Kincaid requests it, Wolfe said. And she will, because her committee's reputation is now at stake. The social vultures will be circling by morning. She will want the matter resolved before breakfast. He was right as usual. Trina Kincaid answered my call within 5 minutes. Her tone was ice over panic, the kind that comes from people who have built too many fundraisers to admit fear. When I explained that Wolfe had unresolved questions, she agreed to reach Lebras and bring him over within the hour. By the time the doorbell rang, Fritz had vanished into the kitchen, probably for moral support or knives. Wolfe hadn't moved, but the tension in the room had changed. It felt like a stage set waiting for its final act. Trina entered first, looking smaller than before, her poise thinned by exhaustion. Behind her came Henri Lebras, every inch of him trembling with restrained indignation. His black suit was damp, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands fidgeted like they wanted to strangle air. You summoned me, he said, not sitting. I come because Mrs. Kincaid insists, but I will not be insulted again. Sit, Wolfe said simply. It wasn't a command. It was inevitability. Henry sat. Wolfe studied him a long moment, then asked, When you tasted Mr. Brenner's puree, you described it as fine, good even. Yet you failed to mention that your own version, made later, was intended for the benefit's final menu. Why omit that? Henry blinked. Because it was irrelevant. Because, Wolfe interrupted. It was motive. Mr. Brenner's sample had been approved by the committee. Yours, I gather, was not. Henry's mouth twitched. Mrs. Kincaid, preferred his style. Too smooth, too elegant. It lacked soul. Meaning it lacked you, Wolfe said. You considered the decision an insult to your artistry. So when the replacement was ordered, you saw your opportunity to adjust his work, to humble him, perhaps even impress the committee with your daring. A pinch of irony, a dash of risk. Only you miscalculated the flavor of poison. Henry's jaw dropped open. Ridiculous. I did no such thing. You think I am a murderer for pride. I think, Wolfe said, his tone cold and final, you are a murderer by habit, of patience, of humility, of respect for the craft that feeds you. Strychnine, monsieur, is tasteless in butter and instant starch, but leaves traces in salt when mixed too late. And when the police test your kitchen's reserves tomorrow morning, they will find your fingerprints on the salt canister used at 11:50. You poisoned Gall not for vengeance, but for applause. Henri rose halfway, then sank back as if gravity had betrayed him. No, he whispered. No, Enough, Wolfe said. You killed Mr. Gall to prove that art and convenience could not coexist. You let Voss take the blame because she embodied everything you loathed about modern cuisine. But your arrogance failed to account for chemistry. You handled the poison with bare fingers, and when you tasted the puree to approve it, you ingested enough to make yourself ill within hours. Trina gasped. Then he... Indeed, Wolfe said. Mrs. Voss's collapse in custody will force the medical examiner to re-examine his samples. He will find trace contamination identical to that on the ladle Henri used to stir the dish before serving. The chef slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. He mocked my kitchen, he said dully. He called me a decorator of soup. Wolfe's expression didn't change. And so you redecorated him with death. That, sir, is not culinary pride. It is gluttony of vanity. I phoned Kramer again. When he arrived this time, he didn't bother with introductions or paperwork. He just looked at Henri, sighed, and nodded. Always one more, he muttered. When they were gone, Wolfe reached for the beer Fritz had placed discreetly by his elbow. He poured it with ceremony, the amber catching the lamplight like quiet applause. Archie, he said, observe the symmetry. A crime born of appetite, solved by appetite. One poisons for recognition, another for comfort. In the end, both are devoured by their own hungers. I leaned against the desk. You really think that's the end? He nodded once. For them, yes. For us, dinner. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city exhaled. And as Fritz reappeared with the evening's roast and Wolfe lifted his fork, I realized that justice in this house always came served with something hot, deliberate, and impeccably seasoned. The rain's retreat left the city gleaming like it had just been invented. Inside the brownstone, calm reasserted itself the way it always does after Wolfe has devoured another riddle. The clatter of forks and the faint hum of Fritz in the kitchen were the closest things to applause. I'd have called it over. Case closed, bad guys cuffed, reputation restored, but Wolfe wasn't blinking like a man who considered it over. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to me. It was to the air. I despise imperfect finales. I'd heard that tone before. It meant I wasn't getting to bed early. Define imperfect, I said, pouring myself another half-inch of beer. Mr. Lebras's confession was not confession. It was capitulation, Wolfe said. He broke, yes, but his phrasing betrayed evasion. He accepted guilt for Gall's death, but not for what followed. What followed? Kramer's got the paperwork signed, the ME has the toxin, and Fritz is off the hook. What's left? Wolfe's eyes opened. The note, Archie. The courier. That was not Lebras's hand. Maybe he paid someone. He didn't have time or money enough to think of it. No. The hand that posted that note, don't serve justice too soon, was another's. Someone who had foresight and proximity and the gall to instruct me. That last word, gall, hung between us like a deliberate echo. Wolfe's lips twitched. I leaned forward. You're not saying gall. No, he said. But someone used his death as prelude. The phone rang before I could press. Fritz answered from the hall and appeared a moment later, his face tighter than I liked. Inspector Kramer, sir. He says it's urgent. I took the receiver. Goodwin. Kramer didn't waste time. We've got a problem, Archie. The poison levels in Gall's autopsy don't match the residue in the tureen. Same toxin, different concentration. Whoever dosed the food didn't. Kill him. Something else finished the job. Something else? Yeah. There's strychnine in his stomach, but a separate compound in his bloodstream. Ethylene glycol. Antifreeze. Slow-acting. Invisible in taste when mixed in spirits. He was drinking sherry before the tasting. The bottle was half full. I whistled low. So someone poisoned the potatoes and the drink? Or wanted us to think so, Kramer said. Either way, your fat friend's theory just got messier. When I relayed it, Wolfe's eyes gleamed like a cat seeing movement under a rug. Ah, 2 instruments, 1 symphony. Someone played accompaniment. Which means someone else was in on it. Or that Gall's murder was 2 attempts crossing paths. 1 crude, 1 elegant. Mr. Labras may have been a fool, but not omniscient. Another hand ensured success. He leaned back, fingertips pressed together. Mr. Goodwin, find Saul. I want the Essex Colonial's private bar inventory, specifically the provenance of their sherry. Who ordered it, who poured it, and who insisted on its vintage. The devil, I suspect, wore silk gloves. By 9, Saul was on the line. Got it, he said. Club records show the sherry came from a private donor. 1 bottle, imported from Cadiz. Delivered that morning with a card, a toast to refinement. Signed, wait for it, Trina Kincaid. That one hit harder than I expected. You're sure? Handwriting matches her committee invitations, and she ordered it through a personal importer. Same guy who supplies her charity events. Says she wanted it chilled and served at noon. I hung up and looked at Wolfe. You're not going to like this. He heard the whole thing in my tone before I spoke. Ah, he said softly. So the Lady of Philanthropy gifts the poisoner his goblet. How poetic. I frowned. You think she meant it? Intention is irrelevant. Effect governs morality. But yes, perhaps she did not intend death. Perhaps only spectacle, or perhaps she meant to clean the table before anyone else could play. 10 minutes later, Fritz ushered her in again. She had traded charity pearls for exhaustion and defiance. You said you wanted closure, she began. Wolfe looked at her the way a glacier regards a campfire. Closure, madam, requires honesty. The sherry you supplied to the tasting was laced. You must have known. Her composure cracked, but not entirely. I sent the bottle as tradition. Every benefit begins with a toast. The club stores all my contributions. If something was wrong, I cut in. Gall's drink was the true delivery. The potatoes only covered the taste of failure. She sank into the red chair. Gall was unbearable. He humiliated everyone who worked with him. He told me the benefit would go on without me, that I was a social relic clinging to my pearls. I wanted to embarrass him, yes. I told Henry to serve the dish hot and heavy to watch him squirm. But poison? Her voice cracked. No. Wolfe watched her for a long time. Mrs. Kincaid, you are neither cruel enough to murder nor wise enough to avoid being used. You were the conduit, not the cause. Then who? Someone who knew your habits. Someone who could intercept your gift, alter its contents, and return it unmarked. Someone with access to both the club and your trust. Her eyes widened. Benton. Wolfe nodded faintly. Mr. Sykes? Yes. His fingerprints are everywhere, but guilt rarely stains them. He handled deliveries, seating, invitations. He called Mr. Brenner's kitchen. He accepted the tureen. He poured the sherry. She stared, whispering. But why? Ambition, Wolfe said. Gall's death leaves a vacancy on the club's board. A promotion delayed by arrogance becomes attainable through tragedy. Mr. Sykes strikes me as a man who prefers shortcuts, especially those disguised as service. She covered her mouth. Oh, God. I reached for the phone again, but Wolfe raised a hand. Not yet. Let him come. Right on cue, the doorbell sounded. Fritz entered moments later. "Mr. Sykes, sir. He says you requested him." Wolfe's eyes half closed, serene as ever. "Indeed. Show him in." Sykes appeared looking like a man caught between guilt and performance. His tie hung slightly off-center, his breath faintly tainted with club whiskey. "Mr. Wolfe," he began, "I came to thank you for resolving this mess. The papers are already calling it a tragedy of ego. But the club survives." "Does it?" Wolfe said mildly. "So do the guilty, sometimes." Sykes blinked. I don't follow." "You will," Wolfe said. "Sit." When he hesitated, I gestured to the chair beside Trina's. He obeyed like gravity had opinions. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. "Mr. Sykes, you orchestrated a remarkable deception. You poisoned Gall's drink, not to kill him alone, but to frame others for his fall. You exploited Mrs. Kincaid's generosity, Mr. Lebrun's pride, and Ms. Voss's vanity. Each became an accomplice in your theater. But you made one error." Sykes swallowed. "And what's that?" "You underestimated chemistry," Wolfe said. "Ethylene glycol, unlike strychnine, metabolizes slowly. Its taste is masked by sweetness, but its scent, faint and sharp, clings to glass. Fritz detected it while cleaning the tureen tray earlier. He assumed it residual from the dish. I, knowing the difference between butter and glycol, corrected him. "You decanted the sherry here. Your hands left prints on the cork. The lab will confirm." Sykes went pale. "You can't prove that." "I already have," Wolfe said. "Inspector Kramer is on his way. He enjoys finishing the paperwork when dessert is waiting." The silence that followed was like static before a storm. Sykes's breathing went ragged. Trina sat motionless, eyes glassy. Then Sykes stood abruptly. "You think you can ruin me with words? You can't." He didn't finish. The door opened, and Kramer's voice filled the space. "No, Wolfe can't, but I can." Two detectives stepped in behind him. The rest was procedural and ugly. Sykes went quietly after realizing protest would only lengthen the headline. When the door closed again, the brownstone exhaled. Trina rose shakily. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "how did you know?" "I didn't," Wolfe said, finally leaning back. "I inferred. The note was bait. Only a man who feared exposure would urge restraint. It was an attempt to mislead me into stopping too soon. Fortunately, I've never been accused of haste." She smiled faintly. "You've saved more than reputations tonight." "Madam," Wolfe said, "reputations recover. Taste once spoiled rarely does." After she left, I poured 2 fingers of brandy and handed him one. "So, 3 poisons, 4 culprits, and a partridge in a pear tree. Happy now?" He lifted the glass. "Now," he said, "it is perfect." Fritz reappeared to announce dinner. Pheasant with truffle sauce. As Wolfe raised his fork, he offered the kind of benediction only he could deliver. "Archie," he said, "remember this. In cuisine as in crime, one must beware of those who season to taste, because taste is the most dangerous motive of all." And with that, the case of the murder in the mashed potatoes ended. Not with thunder, but with the quiet sound of satisfaction and the faint, inevitable hum of digestion following justice. Fritz cleared away the dinner plates in silence, and Wolfe's appetite, though intact, had dimmed from victory to contemplation. He ate the way a chess master studies an endgame, not savoring flavor but extracting order. The brownstone was quiet again. The hum of traffic outside had settled to its nightly rhythm, and the orchids upstairs were no doubt basking in the humid reverence of their lamps. You could have called it peace, except for one problem. Wolfe wasn't relaxed. His eyes, half-lidded and reflective, were working behind their calm like gears in a locked clock. "Archie," he said finally without looking up, "do you remember the precise phrasing of the note?" "Sure," I said. Typed, no signature. She's not the only one who wanted him dead. Don't serve justice too soon. He nodded. Yes. A voice of irony disguised as counsel. The author had intimate knowledge of my methods. I assumed wrongly it was Mr. Sykes, planting diversion. But the syntax is too cultivated for him. He was practical, not eloquent. The tone suggests someone who delights in my reasoning, someone who anticipated it. I frowned. You mean someone who admires you enough to taunt you? That's a short list. You don't collect fans, Wolfe. No, he murmured. But admirers can arise in curious places, especially among those who feel unseen. Unseen, I repeated. Like who? He didn't answer, just gestured toward the notepad on my desk. Write this down. A list of names. Gall, Voss, Bell, Labraz, Sykes, Kincaid. Cross out the dead and the detained. I scribbled. That leaves Mrs. Kincaid. Indeed, he said, and yet I doubt she composed the note. Her distress was genuine, her intelligence insufficiently cruel. Who else had access, intellectual and physical, to the events, yet escaped scrutiny? I leaned back. You think there's still another player? He didn't bother answering. He didn't need to. The phone rang, slicing through the calm. I picked up. Goodwin. Archie, said Saul Panzer, his voice roughened by fatigue. Sorry to wake the beast, but you'll want this. There's a thread nobody pulled. The driver, the guy who delivered Fritz's second tureen. He's missing. I straightened. Missing how? Didn't show up for his next shift. Amber Car Service found his cab parked behind a warehouse on 23rd. Engine cold, door unlocked. No sign of him. Cops think he ditched, but that's not his style. The guy's clean, Navy vet, steady. And here's the kicker. The dispatch record for that run's been tampered with. Somebody erased the digital log and re-entered it an hour later. Whoever did it knew the system. I met Wolfe's eyes as Saul kept talking. You're thinking what I'm thinking, I said. Wolfe's lips compressed. Someone covered the driver's tracks. The substitution of the tureen may not have been executed at the club, or by any of those detained. It may have happened between here and there. Right in transit, I said. Smart, clean, and invisible. That'd make the driver an inconvenient witness. Precisely. Saul sighed through the line. You want me to keep digging? Yes, Wolfe said, loud enough for Saul to hear. Find the driver, alive or otherwise, and find who tampered with the records. Someone went to great lengths to direct suspicion toward those already predisposed to quarrel. That smacks of orchestration, not opportunism. When I hung up, Wolfe was already halfway down the road in his head. The genius of this crime, he said, lies not in its execution but its layering. 3 motives, 3 acts, and 1 puppeteer behind the curtain. I poured him another half-inch of beer. You think the missing driver connects to that note? Indubitably, he said. The note was a breadcrumb intended to test me. If I followed it, I would see the truth. If I ignored it, the case would end incomplete, as Sykes intended. But someone intelligent, deliberate, did not wish it to end. You're saying the note writer isn't guilty? He looked almost amused. Guilt and authorship are not synonymous, Archie. Whoever wrote that note wishes for recognition, not punishment. It was nearly midnight when Saul called again. His voice was lower this time. Found him, he said. The driver, dead, in the river. Pulled out an hour ago near Pier 92. They think he drowned, but his wrists tell a different story. My gut twisted. So much for neat endings. There's more, Saul said. He had something in his pocket, a torn piece of stationery. Looked like it came from the Essex Colonial's letterhead. I got a look before the cops sealed it. 1 word written on it. Comfort. Same as the card you found in the kitchen. I repeated it, and Wolfe's face darkened like a gathering front. Comfort again, he said softly. The word that began this farce returns as an epitaph. Looks like the brand's name has a fan club, I said. Or an owner with secrets, Wolfe countered. We have been too focused on the product. We have ignored its parent. Comfort Foods is not merely a brand. It is an empire of distribution, investments, and partnerships. Gall was one of its financiers, Voss its figurehead, and who manages its public image, its reputation. I froze. You think, yes, Wolfe said. Mrs. Kincaid, the benefactress, the chairwoman of the charity funded by Comfort Foods' Outreach Division. Her hands, I suspect, are cleaner than most, but not unstained. That doesn't fit, I said. She was terrified. He shook his head. Terror can be genuine even in the guilty, particularly when one's game grows larger than intended. We didn't have time to argue. The doorbell rang again, softly, tentatively. Fritz appeared, puzzled. A woman, sir. She says it cannot wait. It was Trina Kincaid, or what was left of her. The steel in her poise had melted. Her eyes were swollen, her hands trembling inside her gloves. She held a sealed envelope, edges damp from rain. I shouldn't have come, she said. But I couldn't leave it like this. I lied to you. Wolfe gestured toward the chair without comment. I did send the sherry, she went on, but not as a toast. I sent it to Jasper Gall's private secretary. He'd been threatening to expose something, a scandal tied to Comfort Foods' new factory in Newark. I thought he was bluffing. I only wanted to frighten him, to make him believe I had influence enough to ruin him first. But someone else knew. Someone inside the company. She placed the envelope on Wolfe's desk. This came to my home tonight. No name, no address, just the same word, typed again. Comfort. And inside, she broke off, eyes glistening. I opened the flap and drew out a small photograph. It was blurry but clear enough. The driver, alive, shaking hands with a man in a suit outside the Colonial's side entrance. The man's face was half turned, but the profile was unmistakable. Kramer, I said quietly. Wolfe didn't move for a long moment. Ah, he said finally, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. So the inspector's hand extends farther than the law. Trina's voice cracked. You can't believe... I believe nothing yet, Wolfe said, but the facts suggest a collaboration between enforcement and enterprise. Mr. Kramer's impatience with publicity may conceal more than professional concern. The driver was silenced. And now, conveniently, the last piece arrives in my house, delivered by the woman who fears both guilt and exposure. That, Mrs. Kincaid, is orchestration at its most malignant. She sank back, pale as milk. Then what will you do? Wolfe looked toward the rain-streaked window. What I always do, madam, illuminate what others prefer to keep dim. When she left, I waited until the door shut. You think Kramer's dirty? He didn't answer. He just stared at the photograph, eyes narrowing with the slow burn of calculation. Tomorrow morning, Archie, we will have visitors. Perhaps not friendly ones. For now, lock the doors and let no one in. Not even the law. There was a tone in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not confidence, not pride, something sharper, quieter, and colder. The kind of tone that meant the game wasn't over. It had only been moved to a higher table, and I had the uneasy feeling that this time the stakes weren't just Wolfe's reputation, or even justice. They were survival. I didn't sleep that night. Wolfe did, or at least he gave the impression of it. He went upstairs a little after midnight, leaving me with the photograph and a warning. We are being watched, Archie. The question is whether by curiosity or conscience. When a man like Nero Wolfe says we are being watched, you make sure every curtain in the house is pulled tighter than a miser's purse. By 3, the street outside the brownstone looked dead, but my nerves kept telling me there was something alive in it. I sat with the photograph under the desk lamp. The grainy image of Kramer, or what sure looked like Kramer, caught mid-handshake with the missing driver. There was just enough blur to give him the benefit of doubt, but not enough to sleep well on. If it was real, it meant the one man who'd kicked in our door for years of cases had finally crossed a line. If it wasn't, it meant someone wanted Wolfe and Kramer to turn on each other. And that, knowing Wolfe, could turn half the city inside out. At 7 sharp, Fritz entered with coffee strong enough to reset the calendar. He didn't ask questions, but his eyes did. I gave him the half shrug I reserve for situations that require caffeine more than answers. Wolfe came down at 8, freshly shaven and wearing the yellow robe of contemplation. He glanced at the photo once, nodded slightly and said, "We will not assume guilt where design might suffice." "Meaning what?" I asked. "Meaning," he said, settling into his chair. The hand that took this photograph may also have placed it. Mrs. Kincaid was terrified, but she was also steered. Someone wants this house to become the stage of a spectacle. "You think the note writer's still out there?" He looked at me over the rim of his cup. "No, Archie. I think they're in here." Before I could chew on that, the doorbell rang. Fritz stiffened. Wolfe gestured. "If it is Inspector Kramer, admit him. If it is not, tell them I am indisposed." Fritz left, and a moment later, his voice floated back. "Inspector Kramer and Sergeant Stebbins." I swore under my breath. Wolfe merely sighed. Providence has a taste for irony. Kramer came in like a man carrying thunder under his coat. He tossed his hat onto my desk, just like always. But his eyes had something new in them. Fatigue mixed with a spark I couldn't read yet. Stebbins stayed close behind him, more nervous than usual, as if the air itself might arrest him. "Wolfe," Kramer said, "I don't know what kind of circus you're running this time, but somebody's trying to hang me with your rope." "Ah," Wolfe said mildly. "So you've seen it." Kramer pulled a crumpled envelope from his coat pocket and slammed it on the desk. "It came to my office at dawn. Same thing you got. Photo, anonymous note, and one word. Comfort." He pointed a thick finger at me. "And I'll tell you right now, that picture's a fake. I never met that driver. I was at the precinct the entire morning before the tasting. Half my division can vouch for me." "I'm not your accuser," Wolfe said, "merely your audience." "Sit." Kramer didn't sit. He leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. "Whoever's behind this has got access. Dispatch logs, private kitchens, private homes. That driver, he was on somebody's payroll, sure, but not mine. I think this goes higher." "Higher than you?" I asked. "That's an altitude I don't enjoy breathing in." Kramer shot me a glare but didn't bite. "I want names, Wolfe. You've got connections, informants. Whoever's trying to frame me is also cleaning up witnesses. The driver's dead, Gall's dead, and someone's still out there moving pieces." Wolfe set down his cup, studying him. "You may find this hard to swallow, Inspector, but you and I are, for once, aligned. Someone wishes to discredit both of us, you with scandal, me with incompetence. The photograph is bait. If I expose you, the ensuing chaos collapses the investigation, and the truth, whatever it is, remains concealed." Kramer frowned, the lines on his face tightening like drawn curtains. "So what's the play?" "Cooperation," Wolfe said simply. "Temporary, conditional, and repugnant, but necessary." For a second, Kramer didn't move. Then, with a grunt that sounded like a broken hinge giving up, he nodded. "Fine, we'll do it your way. But if this backfires, I'm putting you in front of a jury of taxpayers." "I would expect nothing less," Wolfe said. The alliance was about as warm as a snowbank, but it was real. By noon, Saul was back with fresh details. The warehouse where the driver's cab had been found belonged to a shell company, RM and Associates, registered under Comfort Foods Logistics Wing, But the signature on the incorporation form was a name that hadn't come up yet. Raymond Markham. Who's Markham? I asked. Regional operations, Saul said. He's the guy who decides where the money goes when the press isn't looking. Real corporate ghost. Keeps his name out of articles, doesn't show at galas, but his handwriting's on half the internal memos. Kramer swore. Markham's got political friends. If he's involved, it's not just murder, it's cleanup. Wolfe tapped a finger on his desk, slow and deliberate. So the architecture widens. Mr. Gall threatens to expose malfeasance within Comfort Foods, corruption tied to procurement, perhaps even government contracts. Mrs. Kincaid, fearing scandal, attempts intimidation. Mr. Sykes poisons Gall's drink to secure promotion. Mr. Lebras poisons the puree to restore his pride. And behind them all, Mr. Markham orchestrates, eliminating liabilities, a symphony of self-interest conducted by a ghost. Then he's the one who killed the driver, I said. Undoubtedly, Wolfe murmured. And possibly the author of our notes. The word comfort serves him doubly, as brand and signature. A message to those who serve him that he remains untouchable. Kramer rubbed his chin. If he's that careful, how do we pin him? Wolfe looked at me. Mr. Goodwin, you will invite Mr. Markham here. Tell him I possess documents implicating him in the substitution and in the driver's disappearance. He will come. Men like him always come when vanity or fear beckons. I grinned. And if he brings company? Then, Wolfe said, eyes narrowing, I trust you and Inspector Kramer can convince them of the hospitality of this house. By dusk, the trap was set. The brownstone was quiet again, but this time it felt like a loaded gun. Fritz vanished upstairs, Saul hid in the kitchen, and Kramer waited in the front room, chewing a cigar that had long since given up hope. Wolfe sat unmoved, the photograph on his desk like a chess piece waiting to be sacrificed. At 9, the bell rang. I opened the door. Raymond Markham stood there, a tall man, immaculate suit, smooth smile, and eyes that measured everything they saw. Mr. Wolfe, he said, stepping in, I hear you've been very busy making my company's affairs your hobby. Your affairs, Wolfe said, have been unusually homicidal. Markham laughed, low and confident. Business breeds casualties, Mr. Wolfe. But I imagine you already knew that. You didn't summon me to moralize. What do you want? Wolfe studied him with quiet disdain. An answer. Who killed the driver? Markham's smile didn't flicker. Drivers die every day. Kramer stepped from the shadow near the door. So do men who obstruct justice. Markham's composure slipped for the first time. Ah, the law. I was told you were less active, Inspector. Surprise, Kramer said, showing teeth. Now, how about you start explaining why your signature's on every ledger tied to that warehouse? Markham's eyes darted toward me, then back to Wolfe. You've been busy indeed, but you're mistaken if you think this matters. Everything you've got is hearsay and speculation. You'll never trace that poison or that driver to me. Wolfe leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. No, Mr. Markham. I already have. The driver's widow has provided us with a ledger, one you left unsigned but not untraceable. It connects Comfort Foods' research division to a chemical supplier in Newark. You've been running industrial-grade glycol through falsified food contracts. Gall discovered it. The driver transported it. Markham froze. It was only a flicker, but it was enough. Kramer's voice was almost gentle. Got him. Markham recovered fast, but not fast enough. You can't prove? Proof, Wolfe said, is a tedious formality. But your reaction, Mr. Markham, was exquisite. You have condemned yourself with efficiency. I can only admire. The sound of sirens drifted faintly through the rain as Saul's signal went through. Markham's shoulders sagged. For the first time that night, his smile vanished. When the police took him, Wolfe closed his eyes. almost weary. Comfort, indeed, he murmured, a word stretched beyond mercy until it snapped. Kramer lingered by the door, hat in hand. I'll admit it, Wolfe, you still got it, but I'll never forgive you for making me your alibi. I accept your forgiveness in advance, Wolfe said. When they left, the house sank into its natural silence. Fritz returned, relieved, and the smell of coffee drifted in. Wolfe leaned back, hands folded. Archie, he said quietly, there's always another layer. Remember that. The world is not built of villains or victims, but of appetites. I nodded. And in this case, he smiled faintly. All were fed, some more permanently than others. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Inside, the brownstone returned to what it had always been. A sanctuary from chaos, guarded by a man who could read sin in a spoonful of mashed potatoes. Morning brought a headline as gaudy as a Coney Island sign and about as nourishing. The tabloids had already married mashed potatoes to murder and were trying to give the honeymoon to anyone with a recognizably expensive surname. Kramer got a column that made him look like a bulldog, left out in the rain. Wolfe's name showed up once, spelled correctly for a change, wrapped in adjectives that hinted he'd solved it by scowling. I poured coffee, skimmed the bile, and dropped it in the wastebasket where it improved the tone of the room. Wolfe came down at 9, full of peace and calories, which are his preferred breakfast. He inspected the day as if it had been sent up from the kitchen for approval. We are nearly done, he said, eyeing the stack of newspapers like a misbehaving soufflé. Nearly is the operative term. Saul's still chewing, I told him. He's with Kramer at the warehouse paper mill, unspooling whatever Markham ran through it, and the driver's widow is being kept private, the way you requested. Good, Wolfe said. The living should be spared the cleverness of the dead. Before I could ask which dead he meant, Gall, the driver, or the batch of reputations curdled overnight, the bell rang. Fritz went and returned with his eyebrows registering mild surprise. A young man from the Essex Colonial. He says he works in pastry. Wolfe's lids didn't lift, which in our house is a green light. Bring him. He came in with hat in hand and apology in every other pocket. Slim, pale and flowered around the edges by habit. He couldn't pick a chair, so I picked one for him and steered him into it. Name, I said. Emile Rousseau, he gulped. Monsieur, Mr. Wolfe, Mr. Goodwin, please forgive me. I don't mean to intrude. I had to come. Why? Wolfe asked, skipping sympathy. It's not that he's short on it. He just never serves it as an appetizer. Rousseau's fingers twisted themselves into a pretzel. Because of the card, the one that said comfort. That was me. I sat up. Wolfe's eyes opened a millimeter. Explain, he said. I'm a pastry sous, Rousseau said, words spilling. I do not leave the kitchen. The hallway judges me. Yes, Henri, chef Lebras, he hates that anyone may be better at anything than he. He told me to keep my head down and my hands quiet, but I saw things. I saw Miss Voss arguing. I saw Mr. Sykes counting everything that was not money. I saw Mr. Gall make the room smaller, and I saw a man with a suit I didn't recognize come to the side door twice that week. He never signed the book. He spoke to Benton Sykes and left by the service stair. He smelled like new paper. Markham, I said. The kid nodded, eager and miserable. I didn't know his name. I knew his shoes. I thought, if something bad happens, he's part of it. And when the puree came and the lid moved, I thought of Miss Voss and her brand. I wrote comfort on a card and slid it under the spices so that maybe someone would think. Not blame. Think. He swallowed. I watch you work, Mr. Wolfe. On television interviews, in the papers, I thought, if the word is there, you will see it. Wolfe regarded him like he was testing the crumb on a cake. You admire intellect, he said. That's an appetite with fewer casualties than most. Why didn't you come sooner? Because I am a coward, Rousseau said, not dramatically. Because I am poor, because I needed my job, because Henri would skin me and use me as a liner for his tart pans. He looked down at his hands. And because, I thought, maybe the card would be enough. When Mr. Gall died and the police came and Miss Voss and Henri and the others shouted, I knew it was not enough. So I wrote the note to you, the one that said, don't serve justice too soon. I thought if you stopped after Miss Voss, you would miss the rest. The note was typed, I said. You typed it? At the club, he admitted. On the old office machine no one uses because the ribbon is bad. That is why the letters look tired. He glanced at Wolfe. I am sorry. I didn't sign. I thought if I did, someone would sign my dismissal. Or my death. Why come now? Wolfe asked. Rousseau's face pinched. Because of the photograph of the inspector. Everyone has seen it on their phones. Because the driver, the one who took the tureen, he is dead, and that is a river that does not lie. Because Chef Lebras was taken away in tears, and I do not want to be an accomplice to a tragedy I only wish to interrupt. I looked at Wolfe. He was still, which is his way of leaning forward. Mr. Rousseau, he said, was the photograph sent to you? Rousseau nodded miserably. To my locker, in an envelope. No name. The same word. Comfort. But the picture is wrong. How? I said. He leaned timidly and pointed to the blown-up print on Wolfe's desk. There. His finger hovered at the driver's wrist. He wears his watch on the right. He's left-handed. I hand him pastry bags. He pipes with his left. But in this picture, the watch is on the left, and the clock above the side door. Look. Its hands point to 11:40. But Mr. Sykes took the tureen at 12:10. The picture lies about time. I grinned, despite things. Bless you, Emile. You just saved our friend a scandal and me a stomachache. Wolfe inclined his head an imperceptible fraction, which for him is a standing ovation. Mr. Rousseau, you have done well. Late, but well. Your instincts are better than your courage. That is common. Do you have enemies? He blinked. Only the pastry that misbehaves. Good, Wolfe said. Go home. Do not speak to anyone but us or the law, and only when the law is represented by Inspector Kramer. Mr. Goodwin will escort you to a cab. Mr. Panzer will watch the rest. I took Rousseau to the stoop. The day was bright enough to make lies squint. On the way back in, my phone buzzed. Saul. Got presents, he said. Markham's accounts receivable are a tour of sin. Shell's paying Shells, a chemical supplier in Newark pushing ethylene glycol through a frozen desserts R&D line. And the driver's widow. She had a ledger Markham tried to get back last week. Handwritten with initials that match his, R.M., and delivery schedules that put the cab behind that warehouse the morning of the tasting. Also, newsrooms about to drop a piece debunking the Kramer photo. They spotted the wrong clock, same as your pastry kid. Bless the pastry kid, I said, and file him under angelic meddler. Done, Saul said. Heading your way with copies. When I relayed, Wolfe permitted his mouth a microscopic curve. Providence, he said, occasionally employs confectioners. We didn't have to wait long for the next visitor. Kramer came at 11 like a thunderhead that apologized by raining elsewhere. He slammed his hat down, saw Rousseau's absence, and scowled at me as if I'd eaten him. Spare me, he said. The photo's fake. I got a lab monkey at one police plaza who owed me from Holwein. He ran it and found a dozen stitches. Whoever did it was good, but not good enough to fool a clock. You got anything else to make my day worse? Only better, I said, and handed him Saul's copies. He read fast for a man who likes his words with bacon. The lines at the corners of his eyes deepened, and then he went very still, which with Kramer is the equivalent of a genuflection. Markham's cooked, he said. We'll have him on conspiracy, tampering, obstruction, and what the DA likes to call creative finance. Sykes for murder 2, Labras for murder 1. Voss for tampering and reckless endangerment. Bell for attempted obstruction and accessory after. The driver, he shut his mouth and reopened it with an oath that melted the polish on my shoes. I'll see to his widow. Don't tell me you arranged money. I'll pretend I thought of it. We will not deprive you of credit, Wolfe said smoothly. But Mrs. Kincaid, what of her? She's clean, Kramer said roughly. Dumb and clean. The sherry she sent was hijacked by Sykes, who swapped the bottle and left the card. Your man Panzer found the original cork in Sykes's office drawer. Prints and all. He grunted, almost like gratitude. Now, about you, Wolfe. You told me to cooperate. I did. I'll never forgive you. His eyes softened a fraction. But you were right not to swing at the photo. I owe you beer I'll never buy you. I accept your default, Wolfe said, and for a second the corners of both their mouths twitched in a parity we don't see often. After he left, the brownstone did what it always does when justice pays its check. It settled. The orchids were misted. The kitchen resumed its religion. Fritz came to the office threshold and cleared his throat. Sir, he said, solemn as a bishop, if you please, I have prepared something. Wolfe exhaled, suspicious of surprises but tolerant of Fritz's. Proceed. Fritz vanished and returned with a silver tureen. He placed it on the side table with the gentleness of a christening. The fragrance reached us. Warm butter, cream, a whisper of nutmeg that flirted with indecency and backed away just in time. Pomme puree, Fritz announced, redeemed. Wolfe's eyes closed, then opened. He nodded once. You honor the dead by correcting the living, he said. Serve. We ate in the office, which in our house is an act bordering on blasphemy. But Fritz had already heard confessions enough this week. The puree was silk. It erased the taste of lies from the air. Halfway through my plate, I said, You know, for a case that started with potatoes, it sure turned into a smorgasbord. Pride, ambition, convenience, corruption. Everyone got a helping. Appetite, Wolfe said, as if defining a word in a dictionary only he owns. Men do not murder because they are hungry. They murder because they cannot distinguish between hunger and entitlement. You going to make that your epitaph? I asked. Because it would look good carved in something expensive. He ignored me, which is one of the few consistent pleasures in his life. Mr. Goodwin, make note. When you file this case, title the dossier Comfort with Complications and add an appendix on the dangers of substitution. Substitutions, I said. You mean the instant for the real? I mean the ethical for the convenient, he corrected. Mr. Labras substituted vanity for craft. Mr. Sykes substituted advancement for integrity. Mr. Markham substituted profit for legality. Mrs. Bell attempted to substitute cunning for courage. Only Mr. Rousseau attempted the reverse. Rousseau substituted conscience for fear, I said. Not a bad trade. Rare, Wolfe said. He finished the last of his puree, sighed in a way that suggested the world might be salvageable, and dabbed at his mouth with a handkerchief that had watched men fall harder than potatoes. You may tell Fritz the dish has been restored to my table, on Sundays, with trout. I raised my glass. To comfort. He gave me the kind of stare that can curdle lesser creams. To comfort, properly understood, he said, which is to say, earned. We let the quiet move in. It wasn't the heavy quiet of a house holding its breath. It was the kind that comes after something true has been said and doesn't need to be decorated. I cleaned my plate, set my fork down, and thought about the driver's widow, and Emile Rousseau piping patience into delicate shells, and Kramer pretending not to owe us anything, and Trina Kincaid gathering a committee back from scandal with a posture that would creak tomorrow. The phone rang one more time. Saul, of course. He keeps banker's hours when he thinks I'm sleeping. All done, he said. Markham's counsel tried a song and dance and stepped on his own feet. Papers'll run a cleaner version in the morning, photo debunked in the second column. Your pastry kid's going to stay employed. The club's tossing Henri to the wolves and hiring a new chef who won't carry a lab kit in his knife bag. You'll like him. He trained in Lyon and spells butter with a capital B. Tell the DA to spell restitution the same way, I said, and bring me the bill later. Wolfe likes his receipts in triplicate. When I hung up, Wolfe was looking at the window. The late light had come around and was making the glass glow like a restrained halo. Archie, he said, the orchids. I knew what that meant. I left him there, with his thoughts arranged like cutlery, and went upstairs to the greenhouse where the air is humid and clean and fragrant and unambitious. Watering orchids is the closest thing the brownstone has to prayer. When I came back down, he was where I'd left him, but the angle of his shoulders had settled another degree. He closed his eyes, then opened them. We are finished, he said. Until somebody murders the gravy, I said. That, he murmured, would be barbarism. We didn't clink glasses or call the papers. We didn't need to. The brown stone had resumed its shape, the world had been nudged a centimeter toward tolerable, and dinner service would not be interrupted tomorrow. If you want a trumpet fanfare, try Broadway. If you want justice padded in good manners and served with a spoon that doesn't scrape the bowl, try 35th Street. Outside, the city remembered it was night. Inside, we remembered that comfort is not a brand, not a powder, not a shortcut. It's a well-made thing, served honestly, after hard work. And if that sounds old-fashioned, good. The old fashions, in this house, tend to fit. The next morning began with the kind of stillness that means the city hasn't quite decided whether to behave. A thin mist hung over 35th Street, blurring the traffic lights and softening the noise. Inside the brownstone, it was the kind of quiet that only exists after order has been restored. Fritz was in the kitchen orchestrating breakfast. Wolfe was behind his desk, a fortress of calm, and I, as usual, was trying to convince myself the world might go a full day without someone knocking to ruin it. Kramer's phone call came at 10:30, timed like fate and coffee refills. He didn't bother with pleasantries. It's over, he said. Markham folded. He gave up a list of company execs who signed off on the chemical contracts. Says he handled the driver himself to prevent corporate embarrassment. The DA thinks he'll take the needle if it keeps comfort foods off the market page. Congratulations, you've embarrassed another millionaire. I glanced at Wolfe, who hadn't moved. I'll tell him, I said. You two can trade hate mail later. Kramer grunted. Do that. And Goodwin, tell him the DA said something about owing him dinner. I told the DA he doesn't own a plate big enough. I hung up. Wolfe's eyes opened, slow as sunrise. Satisfied? I asked. He frowned slightly. No. Gratified, yes. Satisfaction is a luxury for fools. Then consider me a fool, I said. We got the killer, cleared Fritz, restored your puree to the realm of the edible, and made Kramer look almost human in the press. If that's not satisfaction, what is? He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the orchid on his desk, a pale purple hybrid that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought beauty was a form of logic. Archie, he said after a while, do you know why I take these cases? Because you enjoy human folly, the way some men enjoy cigars. Partly. He touched the orchid's stem with one finger. But more than that, because it irritates me that the world keeps proving itself incapable of distinguishing between competence and luck. The guilty prosper by both. It is an untidy arrangement. I dislike untidiness. Sure, I said, but you also like the fee. He gave a faint sound that might have been a chuckle if it had gone to finishing school. A secondary consideration. The bell rang, soft but firm. Fritz appeared with that expression that says the outside world has once again trespassed. "Mrs. Kincaid," he announced. Trina Kincaid entered like someone walking through a memory she wasn't sure she still owned. Her composure had been stitched back together, but the seams showed. She carried a small box, lacquered black, the kind of thing that might hold jewelry or apologies. She placed it gently on Wolfe's desk. "I came to thank you," she said, "and to return what belongs to you." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Nothing of mine requires return. This does." She opened the box. Inside was a small folded card, the original comfort note from the club's kitchen, sealed now in a plastic sleeve. "I thought about destroying it," she said, "but then I realized it belongs in your collection, a reminder of what can grow from something small and thoughtless." Wolfe stared at it as though he were reading the dictionary of mankind in a single word. Indeed, a note intended to warn became the fulcrum of a murder, a lesson in proportion. She hesitated. "The club's board has asked me to resume the benefit. The newspapers are already calling it the Comfort Affair. I intend to rename it. Something simpler. The Gall Fund, for the driver's widow and the staff who lost their jobs." Wolfe inclined his head. "A just redirection," she smiled faintly, "and perhaps a chance to serve potatoes without peril." I walked her to the door, and for a second, as the sunlight hit her face, I saw the exhaustion lift. She left lighter than she arrived. When I came back, Wolfe was still staring at the note. "She'll be fine," I said. "So will Fritz, and Kramer will get over it. That leaves just you and me, which means it's either beer or orchids. Your pick." "Neither," Wolfe said. "It is reflection time." "On what?" He leaned back, hands folded over his stomach. "On comfort, Mr. Goodwin. The word has been soiled in this affair. It was wielded as motive, as signature, as mockery. Yet comfort, true comfort, does not corrupt. It restores. It requires effort, precision, honesty. When men seek comfort without earning it, they destroy its meaning, just as they destroy the things that sustain them." I looked at him for a moment, then said, "That's philosophy. I'm a working man. What I take from this is, never trust anyone who sends you mashed potatoes." He actually smiled. "A sensible precaution." Fritz entered then, bearing a tray with the day's lunch, braised pigeon with truffle and a modest serving of pomme puree. Wolfe inhaled, visibly appeased. "Redemption," he murmured. "Serve, Fritz." As I poured the beer, I thought of the whole twisted trail, the porcelain bowl, the word comfort written like a curse, the poisoned puree, the driver in the river, the photo that lied, the men who thought they could bend truth for convenience. All undone by patience, deduction, and a stubborn fat man who refused to rise for anything but truth or trout. "You ever think about retiring?" I asked as I passed him the glass. He looked offended. "From reason? Never. From murder, then?" "That," he said, "depends on the frequency of human folly." We ate in silence. Outside, the city remembered how to make noise again, the sound of wheels and ambition. Inside, the brownstone stayed as it was, timeless, sealed, alive with logic and lilies. I filed the note in a drawer labeled "Resolved," though with Wolfe's cases, the term is relative. After dessert, he said, "Archie, take dictation." "Now?" "Yes. A letter to the inspector. My dear Kramer, it appears that neither of us is incorruptible, only differently tempted. May we continue to fail the devil at alternate intervals." I grinned. "You sure you want to send that?" "No," he said, closing his eyes. "But it pleases me to write it." By the time I finished typing, the room had settled into the warm quiet of closure. The scent of truffle and coffee drifted lazily, like memory itself deciding to take a nap. Wolfe was already reaching for a book. something Latin and unreadable, and I, with the satisfaction of a man who's earned his beer and his paycheck, leaned back and let the moment sink in. Outside, a delivery truck rolled by, carrying, see if the lettering could be trusted, Comfort Food's new product line, Instant Gratitude. I laughed out loud, and Wolfe, without looking up, muttered, "The human race remains undefeated." And that was that. The end of the murder in the mashed potatoes. The kitchen was clean, the conscience clearer, and for one rare, beautiful hour, the brownstone was exactly as it should be. Full, quiet, and free from poison. 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 Free from poison.